Welcome, everyone. I'm Dartricia Rollins, the Assistant Director of Charis Circle, the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books and More, the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Tonight's event is co-hosted by the incredible BLF Press. BLF Press is an independent Black feminist publishing house dedicated to amplifying the work of Black, Indigenous, and queer women of color. And a special shout out to Stephanie Andrea Allen, the incredible editor-in-chief at BLF, who brought us Krystal and Jewelle Gomez tonight. So I will go over some quick housekeeping. If you have not already purchased your book, you may do so via the teal button at the bottom middle of the screen. And if you have a question for the panel, please put them in the Ask a Question box at the bottom center of your screen. If you see a question that you like that someone else has already asked, you can upvote it to make sure it gets seen. And if you like to watch the virtual event with computer-generated captions, please watch it in Google Chrome and enable captions. So, tonight we're celebrating Jewelle Gomez in conversation with Krystal A. Smith for a celebration of Stillwater poems. In Stillwater, Gomez contemplates her sexuality, multi-ethnic and class identities, and what it means to experience love, loss, grief, friendship, and solidarity with other women during times of political upheaval. Jewelle Gomez's poems are a gift, at times sumptuous and impassioned, and always striking in their clarity. Jewelle Gomez is a playwright, novelist, poet, and cultural worker who was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. She was on the original staff of one of the first weekly Black television shows, Say Brother, at WGBH TV in Boston. She lived in New York City for 22 years before moving to the Bay Area. She's the author of 8 books, including 3 poetry collections and the first Black lesbian vampire novel, The Guild of Stories. It was recently optioned by Cheryl Dunye of Watermelon Woman for a television miniseries. Her plays, Waiting for Giovanni, Leaving the Blues, and Unpacking in P-Town, were commissioned by New Conservatory Theater Center in San Francisco for their West Coast premiere. And now we have Krystal A. Smith, who's a poet and speculative fiction writer. Her poems have appeared in Entropy Magazine, Serendipity, Kissing Dynamite, and Sinister Wisdom. Her collection, Two Moon Stories, was a 2019 Lambda Literary Award finalist. Her poetry collection, This Is Not About Love, from BLF Press as well, explores the complexities of human emotion and relationships via memory, experience, and imagination. Please welcome Jewelle Gomez and Krystal A. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. All right, let's jump right in. Jewelle, it is such an honor to be able to speak with you and to be with you tonight. I'm so thrilled, and I am so excited about your collection. Would you like to read some poems for us to get us started?
Okay, I've got 3 things here to read. And Krystal, it's great to be able to chat with you. I'm really, I love Two Moons. I'm just finished reading This Is Not About Love. So
thank you.
I'm really happy we get to chat now.
Me too.
Hi to everyone out there who decided to hang with us this evening. I'm going to read 3 pieces from the new book. Again, thank you to Stephanie Andrea Allen for putting this book together at BLF Press. And the first poem is called We Are Everywhere. And I wrote it for the astronaut Sally Ride, 1951 to 2012. Being a first can be a drag, overwhelming the accomplishment itself. The talk is of firstness, as if that is the secret ingredient to your success. First woman, first queer, first left-handed, first native, first Muslim, first Black, first Catholic, first Buddhist. The path you forged that led to stepping into light is obliterated The dust of rejection, the well-worn ruts repeatedly broached, the slam of closed doors and skeptical glances are ignored. The quality of first becomes a crown whose glitter blinds all to the toil and heartbreak, the secrets and soul searching before you stumbled through the door. But it is those impediments that need to be highlighted. The mirror you consulted before writing your bio or smiling into the camera. It knows the harsh trick of light that reveals only a chaste profile. Now that we know something of the secret you held, I want to see you in your gear again. Youngest woman, first known lesbian in space. I want you to be able to take all of yourself out there into the vacuumed silence that is the universe. This time your spacesuit will be purple. There's a portrait of your lover painted on the helmet. Stars may still look distant from where you float in the cosmos, but they are blinking and glimmering directly at you, thrilled. They have the perfect perspective to see all you've endured to rest in their embrace, where I can see you by their light. Okay. So I was born in Boston, which you all just heard, and San Francisco now has a number of the streetcars, vintage streetcars from around the world. And they have the orange streetcar, one of the orange streetcars that used to go up and down in my neighborhood that I used to ride. And the car turnaround was right across from my house. So when I first saw the Boston streetcar in San Francisco, I was aghast. And it brought back this memory of the Boston streetcar, 1958. I stare at the numbers etched above the white woman's wrist bone. Breath jams in my throat when my grandmother nudges me sharp with her elbow. Already at 10, I'm embarrassed at seeming rude. We sit in the trolley, colored and not, waiting for it to pull out of the car barn, and the space becomes small. I look away at my shoes, adverts above our heads, at the split cushions, tufts of cotton sprouting as if waiting to be picked. I gaze at my own brown skin, soft and unmarked. I glance next at her other sleeve, black cloth, cuff not frayed, a bit too short, but unremarkable. The buttons in her lap say nothing either. A straight march of dollops leading up to a shock of blued white collar at her neck. Its starkness stops me from going further. Our orange streetcar shakes and sways to life, downtown adventure by way of Tremont Street. At each stop, back and front doors creak folding open, odd welcome in their hinges. Saturday climbs on board, noisy boys, beribboned girls, brown, black, white, each a universe patched around me like those pastel states in maps of the country. Some sit, others balance loosely above, swaying close on leather straps, providing cover so I may glimpse her face. The car rolling on its track is usually soothing. The shock of her thin wrist recalls a war movie, black and white faces marked by shadow a child can't understand. Until that moment, on that trolley, The numbers on her arm had been a dramatic fiction crafted from nightmares. Today, the Boston car travels Market Street, the same clanging sway, orange, lumbering beside palm trees, 3,000 miles from home. When it passes me, even now, I see her face, younger than my grandmother. At a stop before ours, she stepped down to the street and looked back at me, thin brows and firm lips framed by limp curls that did not shine, her eyes dark as an empty room. And the third poem I want to read is for my mother. It's called Alcatraz Reunion. Mother is a tourist visiting me, as I did her when I was a child, being raised elsewhere, worried always she'd forget me. Today we pretend she taught me how to read or ride a bicycle, that she waited by the door for me to arrive after school or watched me dress for my first dance. We act as if I were not abandoned, as if we'd shared secrets when I was a teen. Instead, I was anxious the world would see me for who I was, a girl separate from a mother. Boarding the ferry, we are not exactly strangers, nor are we a fragrant recollection of worlds lived side by side, giving shape to each other. We are two aging women buying memories from the souvenir stand, damp by the gangway, taking snapshots that will remind us how alike we are. It's a cold ride and perverse to be among those eager to peer through prison bars to glimpse long past misery, the ghosts of anger pacing and fear caged so close to city lights. Only when we land does the spark of Wampanoag and Ioway fill her eye as it did with her mother, as it does with me. Prairie dust and Atlantic sea grasses unite at the precipitous Pacific shoreline, harsh and familiar, mapping the beginning. Others amble up the path toward prison lore. We go deep beneath the thick crumbling walls where rock meets rock, sacred space, not prison. We cross the distance between us in that hard, stolen place. Ioway and Wampanoag meeting Ohlone, Pomo, Youre, Hoopa, Shasta, and Hopi, Modoc, Sioux, Paiute, Seminole, Menominee, Inuit, Choctaw, Lenape, Ute, Ojibwe, Maidu, a nation of nations. The soft shuffle of their feet on stone is a dance certain to bind all together. Resting on a bench, finally, we hold hands, like we might have done when I was a child, clinging tight as if the pressure of our palms will allow us to read each other's pasts. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. So when I read these poems, I feel a very strong connection pathway that reaches to the past and connects to the future. How purposeful was that? How much of that was your intention when you put this together?
Well, I'll tell you, I always tell people that I am a lineophile, lesbian lineophile mostly, but lineophile, I made up that word because for me, it means I'm looking very deliberately at the past to see where it does link up with the present and link up with where we might want to go in the future. I firmly believe, and this may be because I was raised by my great grandmother, who was always telling me stories of the past, of her past, and because I grew up in a neighborhood in Boston in which people were always thinking about the beautiful things that happened in that neighborhood in the 40s, and the 30s. And so I became really interested in how that past touches us, how our past touch us, touch those around us, and lead us on paths to the present and the future. So the poems, they kind of tended to go in that direction. When we started putting them together, I realized I'm at a point in my life, at my age, where I am starting to think about and gather together all of those things, those treasures from the past.
Yeah, I love that. It's so clear that you're speaking to the past, and you're speaking to specific people in these poems, but you're speaking to everyone. It's very vivid. I've never been on a trolley car or anything, but I feel like, oh, I can sit here and be in this moment, while you're reading these poems. While there are, moments of connection, I want to ask you about the first two poems, January 20th, 2021, and Eleanor Bumpers reminds you this is not the Titanic. Now, Jewelle, you go in. You from jump, you go in on these poems, and you're speaking to us. January 2021. Don't you know that talking about a revolution sounds like a whisper? A line from Tracy Chapman's song. It's not the same as the crackle of men losing their grip on phantoms of the past. It's, you want us to hear you. And then in the second poem, Eleanor Bumpers, you say, there ain't no ship coming to save you this time. No native's gonna teach you how to cook a turkey. Wow, like you're not messing around. Like, these first two poems really attack and give us this information. Like, are you listening? Will you tell us about these two pieces and why they were put back to back, perhaps, and what you want us to hear in these pieces?
Sure. I really like talking about my poems. It's in part because when I talk about them, I get to talk about people connected to them and how I got into them. And the first poem, January 20th, 2021, remember everyone was talking about how exciting it was that 1/20/2021 was the popular, the numbers going back and forward, as if that was somehow going to usher us into a new century, a new world, saviors. But a friend of mine had a party for the president's inauguration, Julie Dorff, who's an old friend, and she asked me if I could come, and I couldn't come, but she said, well, don't you have a poem we could read there and celebrate? And I said, well, I am working on something. And I had been, reading these posts because someone had used Tracy Chapman's lyrics without her permission. Mm-hmm. And it was a whole thing back and forth about that, which is infuriating. So I wanted to write something in which I used a line from her lyrics and honored her. Yes. So that's how that poem started. And I wanted, don't you know that talking about a revolution sounds like a whisper? And I wanted for us to think about how change happens, how it's not something happening outside of us. It's something happening inside of us that we have to accomplish first with ourselves and then in the world. So that's how that poem came about. And the Eleanor Bumpurs poem, the epigraph is from James Baldwin for that poem. And the quote from Baldwin is, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain." And I feel like that quote is so apt for what we are looking at today in terms of the right, the active right terrorism against African Americans, against Asians, against all people of color and queer people. It is so apt to understand them that they know if they let go of this hate, they're going to have to deal with the stuff that's coming, that's inside. And so that quote from Baldwin really made me think about that pain, and having seen so many Black people murdered, often by police, it took me right back to Eleanor Bumpurs, who was the first person that I think I ever heard on the news who was murdered by a police officers. She was a mentally disturbed woman. The apartment in the Bronx, they were trying to evict her, and she didn't want to be evicted for very good reason.
Right.
And the police shot her with a 12-gauge shotgun. And they said, well, she was carrying a knife. I'm sorry. A 12-gauge shotgun, most people can't even imagine what kind of hole that leaves in you. So I wanted to hear Eleanor Bumpurs, these many years later, decades later, tell us what's about to come. And about the history that is really chilly and is going to freeze you if you don't keep moving. And that's what people have to do is keep moving in order to keep changing. So I wanted to remember Eleanor Bumpurs and have her tell us, even if you do what I say, and you better do what I say, there's still going to be pain. It's still going to be painful. And my favorite line is like, remember when you used to apologize to your daddy for being bad? Then he told you to go out to the alley and bring him back a switch. That's where we are right now.
We in trouble. We in big trouble.
You gotta bring that switch. You gotta bring that switch.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's so, it's so interesting that you channeled her, and you also bring, her back to us. If people don't know, hopefully, they will look her up. And it's very much, people say that, you're never forgotten as long as someone remembers you,
Yes.
And so that is a very nice way to honor someone, to bring them into the page, and let people learn about them or remember them. So I thought that was just really fantastic, and that just got me so hype reading these poems when I was going through them. So thank you for that. Do you have a favorite poem in this collection?
Well, you're not supposed to have favorites. It's kind of like children. But I actually do, and it's so funny. I decided not to read it, but it's the one about Happy Medusa and Reclining Sappho.
I just so happen to have that tagged.
It takes place
it was one of my
Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And I don't know why I mean, it grew out of something that actually happened, me being in the museum and realizing that Sappho was at one end of this floor and Medusa was at the other, and all of the mythology around Medusa and her being evil and the hair and the snakes. And I thought, well, of course, that mythology probably grew out of someone seeing an African woman with locks all over her head and freaking out and deciding that they were snakes and could kill you, turn you to stone. So I constructed that poem around Sappho and Medusa being, lovers, kind of.
Yes, this poem is so seductive and so sensual. The way they are, looking at each other and acknowledging that they are aware of each other. I feel like us femmes have a way of like knowing who's in the room.
Who's in the room? It's true. And if anyone is ever at the Metropolitan, I'm not telling people to rush off and see stolen culture from other places at the Metropolitan. But on the first floor, on a side gallery on the first floor, Sappho is so gigantic. Oof. I mean, literally, it's like I say in the poem, it's like her leg is as big as my whole arm. And that alone was worth the view because of, the way Sappho has become iconic for lesbians. And every time people write biographies, they talk about what a tiny woman she was. And I just love that her marble statue is so gigantic. And that she kind of she's laying out, And at the other end, there you have the head of Medusa. And for me, I like to think of it as she can greet me with her eyes downcast so that she doesn't turn me to stone. So that's really my favorite poem.
Yes, I like pulled out the pencil and I was like, ooh, underline, because it was so subtle, and just how these two figures acknowledge each other, kind of entice and tease, and it's just so subtle. And I feel like we do that in the real world. Us femmes, we have a way, and I feel like, Jewelle, I feel like you definitely embody this femme, powerful, larger than life image, which I love that you brought the attention that Sappho is larger than life. She's big. She's not just shrinking in the background. So I just think that is so it's just sexy. It's just so beautiful. We get underestimated a lot, but we do a lot of heavy lifting. We're not just damsels.
Right. No, I prefer to think of femmes as guerrilla warriors.
Yes.
And it is an interesting. That you brought that up. It is interesting because people on the street in general, it's easier for femmes to be overlooked as lesbians or not noticeably lesbian. And so I follow the lead of my friend Emily Culpepper, who used to wear a button. I am a lesbian. And I have several of them. Emily's online. I love it. I have several of those buttons that I pop on every once in a while because, unless I'm in the Pride Parade, no one really notices. I also like to do it, mention it in my poems occasionally too. And I did write this poem about wanting to use the word lesbian in a poem.
Colored lesbian poem?
A colored lesbian poem, because I feel, we have so many things we can use now, so many words and phrases, and I think it's great, and to be that inclusive and to figure out words, as I say, umbrella words that hold us all in the tent. But then I think I don't want lesbian to get lost, because it is still a word that frightens a good bit of the world. And I think women are still frightening to a good bit of the world. So I had to write the colored lesbian poem.
Yes. That's one of my favorite also. You say, referencing the button, I wear it on a button when I visit old people in their active living communities, just to remind them I'll be living with them soon, and some sisters are already there. I love this poem as well, because it's like, don't erase me. Don't let me, go, and I won't let you erase me. Yeah, I love this poem as well. Now, let's see. I have a couple other poems here. Oh, we have some questions in the chat. Let's see what we have from the people. Hello, people. All right, let's see. Your poem about mother touched me, and I relate so well to the pretend and crossing the distance with my mother. I'm intending to bring this poem to the next Sunday's meeting. Can you speak to the level of giving up or giving in to the peace of acknowledging it, and how to bring peace with loss? So it looks like the person asking the question is asking, how do you come to terms with that loss of maybe not having that particular relationship with someone?
Yeah, it's a process. As I have told people, I spent a lot of money in therapy to get to the point where I stopped expecting my mother to be the mother. I had a lot of, obviously, expectations anyway, but then there was the fact that my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and I have very similar faces. I mean, if you look on the cover of the book, once you buy the book, our faces are very similar. Our eyes, the shape, the features, and people have always commented on that. So, growing up, I always felt like this really deep affinity for the women relatives I had. And I was very close to my grandmother and my great-grandmother, but obviously not to my mother. So it was doubly disappointing to have that connectivity by the way we look, and then disconnection, because she was not present, and she didn't really know how to be present. And it wasn't just me, but it was me in many ways, because of my skin color was a little too dark for her. I also think I reminded her of my father, and once they split up, she did not want to be reminded of that. And so for all of these reasons, she was not able. And so what I worked on in therapy and after was to figure out a way to not expect her, to have things be a surprise when she showed up, and that I could be happy that she showed up, but not be in constant disappointment, because that is really not good for you emotionally and psychically. And to really look at her for who she was. My mother was, I used to say My mother was eternally 14, narcissist, and she did amazing things. Like at the age of 50, she graduated from high school.
Wow.
She'd been a nurse's aide all of her life, when she wasn't being a glamour girl. And then she went back to college and became a nurse, a registered nurse, and was a nurse for several years before she retired. So she did amazing things. She lived through marrying a white man, a French Canadian, in a small Rhode Island town where people hated them. And she survived and raised a beautiful son. So I tried to focus on those things and focus on that moment when we did hold hands, and I knew that she could feel the difference between us in holding hands as adults. So I think we owe it to ourselves as adults to not be burdened by who our parents were. And I used to tell girlfriends in the past, before I was married, I would tell girlfriends, I'm not going to hold your parents against you. So don't worry, you can introduce me, but I'm not going to hold them against you. And I think we have to be aware that we cannot hold on to their issues.
Yeah. That's such a familiar kind of feeling. I just celebrated a birthday, and my my older brother, he said, he sent me a message. He said, "Happy birthday! You look just like mom." And it's so hard to be like, "Oh, thanks." Our mom passed away. I didn't have the best relationship with her, but she was a different person to the boys than she was to me. And so, I totally understand. I look just like her, and it feels very much like, oh, the mirror has two faces. Like I'm me, but I'm also sometimes a representative of my mom to other people. So I definitely understand, that what you're saying with that. I can definitely relate to that.
And it's one that happened. The feminist movement gave us a lot to work with in reclaiming our female past and teaching us that women gave so much to the culture that was being ignored and still being ignored, quite honestly. And so we recaptured our mothers at the same time. We weren't really figuring out, okay, we're recapturing our mothers, but we need to get a little distance from our mothers.
Yes.
Because we are not our mothers.
We are not them, yes.
Yeah. I think it's a very big deal to understand and love them and think about what they had to go through to get to where they are and take a step back.
Yeah, that's the part that helps heal, like they were going through something very unique and hard to them. And as children, we don't necessarily see that, but as an adult, you're like, oh, you were a whole person as well. So, you had things going on that a child just would not understand. And it doesn't hurt any less, but it clarifies a lot.
Right. It's like that separation is so important for you to go on to your own life.
Yes. Oh, so good.
Yeah. And
Let's see.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we have another question from the audience, our wonderful audience. She says, or they say, I read the Gilda Stories as a sophomore in college. What do you hope students are having conversations about when they are assigned your work? Oh, that's a good question.
That is. Wow. Well, I'm hoping they're having conversations about when they get to see Cheryl Dunye's film of the Gilda Stories. I hope they're having conversations about my sequel to the Gilda stories, which I'm writing right now.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
But also I hope that what I wanted to write still comes through, which was not a superhero story, but a coming of age story. The coming of age takes a couple hundred years. I wanted to write a story about how a young woman comes into her own power, that she makes an agreement to do something really radical, radical change. Most of us won't be called on to do anything quite that radical to come into our power.
I'm ready.
That we do have to make some kind of radical acceptance of a new life in order to change, and that then the power is in you to make change. She's not a superhero, but she is someone who thrives not just on blood, but on giving others a way to connect to something within themselves that's healthy and changing for them. And that was a big deal for me to figure out. And thank you to my publisher, Nancy Bariano, who's actually the one who said, do you really want to write a story about a woman who's a serial killer? I said, oops, I guess not. That's not really the feminist vision I have. And so I had to think a lot about what the character could be if she wasn't killing people all of the time. So we thought together and came up with this idea of an exchange. And to me, that was really the most important things I've ever, I really, up until then, had ever done as being a writer, is to reframe, to do a radical change internally, to reframe a mythology as old as vampire mythology. Yeah. And so I want people to see it's about how we take the power ourselves, within ourselves, and help others. That's what I want people to be talking about. And it's something that can help women talk with their brothers who are caught in this cycle of power that requires guns, that requires abuse, that is fueled by anger. And to help, those who are raising sons see, no, that is not how you get to be a grown-up. There are other things that will give you power. And that's a hard lesson for boys to take in and learn. But if we don't teach that, we will never have the peace that we keep wanting to have.
That's deep. That goes deep, because I feel like people look at power and immediacy. Like if you're violent, if you take it, you have your power immediately. But there's a different type of power that resides in like a stillness, in a learning, in a patience. And I don't think we value that yet as a society. And to look at Gilda, to make a purposeful choice and to, go through life in a patient, slow kind of way is a completely different type of power that, that you're talking about, that we need to embrace.
Absolutely. And I feel like in the poems in my book, I'm talking a lot about identity. And the identity is never going to be one thing.
Right.
It's going to be layers of things. And we have to layer in levels of self-consciousness, of self-awareness. We don't layer that into our identity. We're prone to fall back on the things that have not worked before, and all of those things that just don't work, have not worked historically, and are not going to work in our future.
Yeah, it's not going to work. Oh, that gave me chills. Oh, that gave me chills.
I think I've written each of them in a different tells us we have to become lineophiles ourselves. We have to find the ways that worked in the past or didn't work in the past. We have to look at that history, figure out what is best to use in the present, or keep, making those same mistakes over and over again. And that's, I don't think, and I don't want to put all the burden on queer people, but we're the best ones to do it.
We know what's up. Yes, we know what's going on.
We come from all these different places, ethnicities, class backgrounds, genders, sexualities. We're all in that queer mix. And so we're the ones who know what the possibilities are if we would just pay attention to what all those identities mean to ourselves and to each other.
Yeah. We have a certain level of awareness. We have to, in a way. So yeah, we're kind of in the mix before other folks. So yeah, I like that. Wow. Let's see. It's not a question, but a comment. Marty says they are so delighted to read that the Octavia Butler was inspired by the Gilda stories. That's fantastic. I know you help writers all across their journey as a writer, just beginning in the middle process and as they move on to different things. So that's fantastic to know that Octavia Butler, also one of my favorite writers, was inspired by your book Gilda Stories.
She was very kind to me. Octavia was very kind to me, and we did, I guess it was the first Black speculative fiction conference ever at Clark Atlanta University, probably 25 years ago, with Tanana Reeves, Stephen Barnes. And it was the first time meeting all of them, and it was really extraordinary. And she was a phenomenon unto herself, very kind of even-tempered. Well, I don't know if she was even-tempered, but she presented as even-tempered. And excellent listener, and in the anthology called, I'm going blank now. I'm looking back. It's Speculative Fiction, 100 Years of Speculative Fiction from the Black Diaspora.
Ooh, okay.
And it was really, really groundbreaking. There were 2 editions, and in the second edition, I transcribed a conversation with Octavia and Tanana Reeves and Stephen, and it just listening to her talk was inspiring in and of itself. So I feel like, and then there's your book, 2 Moons, one of my favorite speculative books. 2 Moons is fabulous. I mean, I am so proud because when I started writing the Gilda stories, Octavia Butler was writing, and Samuel L. Delaney were writing. And Samuel L. Delaney is brilliant, but his work is so brilliant, I can't even understand it most of the time. he was the other queer writer, and Octavia was publishing, but there really were not a lot of speculative writers, speculative fiction writers. So 30 years later, it's so amazing, you know. I just am so excited that there's so much to read from women of color, especially. You know, it's, you know, Stephanie's got her book.
Yes.
Her speculative fiction book. I just love that we have so much happening, because I think, you know, the surrealist artists believe in order to change the world, you have to first change your dreams.
Yes.
And I think of speculative fiction as a way that we change our dreams.
Yes.
And I also think of poetry as a way to change the dreams, because you gather so much up inside of you to write a poem, and you can bring out anything that you want in a poem. And so I think of poems as ways to change the world too.
Yes, yes. It really does change your perspective. Speculative fiction, you have to think in a different way. You have to imagine. You have to let yourself go beyond, you know, the precipice to see if it will, you know, work on the page. And poetry is so, to me, poetry is so loaded. You can absolutely, you know, get in there with the most basic language that you make beautiful. So I absolutely agree. It definitely changes. It changes us on an individual level, and it changes the world as well. Oh my goodness. This has been so brilliant. So brilliant. Let's see. I think there is one more question from our audience. Let's see here. This one's a little bit long, but let's see here. I see you as lovingly bold and unapologetic. Alice Walker spoke of telling the truth and then the whole truth. Good, bad, ugly, and pretty. Speaking of her journals being published, your writing is full of grace and generosity. Yes, it is. Where do you go to get the authenticity, vulnerability, and transparency without fearing to offend, out, or insult others? Oh, wow. This is such a in-depth question. So in your own writing, where do you go? Where do you find that ability to be the most authentic, the most vulnerable, and to have that transparency without, you know, repercussions from the outside?
Oh, well, thank you for that observation of my work. I really appreciate it. I think one of the first things as a writer, and it's hard for us to imagine it, particularly those of us who have come from communities which have been oppressed, whether it's people of color or women or lesbian. I think it's hard for us to believe that we can hurt other people's feelings, you know, because we're scrambling to get above the water, to keep our heads above the water, to get out of that barrel we've been thrown into. So it's first recognizing that my words have the ability to hurt others. I worked a lot during the Gilda stories. I did not want it to seem like my novel, which is predominantly women characters, female characters, but I didn't want it to seem like it was because Gilda hated men. And, you know, I kind of went through and bean counted to make sure, well, there's enough white people in here, and there's enough white men in here, and stick one in that category, you know, because you can hurt people so accidentally.
Yeah.
And then once I realized, oh, yeah, even I, the oppressed lesbian of color, I could say something not thinking and hurt somebody. And I feel like once I understood that, I have that has been part of my political
Mm.
perspective as a lesbian feminist. Not to say that I won't ever say or do something that hurts somebody. I certainly have,
Mhm.
but understanding that I can, to look at it if it's raised to me, and then decide, well, how do I approach, what do I do? And somebody gave me a really great thing. This is just one example. When you misgender someone and, say you call them a she and they tell you they're not a she.
Mhm.
Well, your first feeling is guilt. You're horrified you made a mistake. You don't know what to do. But this friend of mine who's trans said, just go, thank you.
Mm.
Because they're giving you some information you did not have. And
Yes.
what do you do when you get information? You say, thank you. And I feel like we can figure out ways to communicate with each other in our writing, in our stories, in our poems, and be authentic and really talk about the difficulties between people, for ourselves, and at the same time be respectful. And I write a column for the San Francisco Bay Times every month. And this month, for the first time ever, I wrote about having an abortion when I was 19. And I was a lesbian, and so obviously I did not want to have a baby. And I wanted to go to college. I did not want to be tied to a guy that I had just been seeing, because you're supposed to see guys when you're a teenager.
Right.
But I'd never written about that because I felt like, are lesbians going to understand why an abortion from their lesbian writer? And I finally thought, oh no, there's so much going on around abortion. I need to speak out and have it clear. We all need to be supporting the women's rights to choose.
Yes.
And so I wrote that piece for the San Francisco Bay Times, which is a queer San Francisco paper. So we have to be deliberate and intentional in our thinking and writing. And if we are, we're usually going to be authentic, I think. I hope.
Nice. Yeah. Wow. I love that. It's a lot to think about. Yeah, I love that. That's good. Well, I don't see any more questions in the little ask a question here. We might be around the end. I think. Would you like to close us out with a poem, or have any last things you'd like to say for us?
I think we're going to be closing out, but I do want to say thank you to the people who've attended, because the people who are the readers, you're the reason I get up in the morning. And to my friends, who I see some of those names over there in the chat, and cousins like Sarah Schwartz, thank you for coming. It's like, I know it's horrible when relatives do things and you're expected to attend. But thank you. This was fun. This was
so fun, and I appreciate you, and I respect you and your work so much. And thank you so much for just, put it all out on the page and giving us something to enjoy and aspire to.
All right. Partay.
I'll be quick with the closing since I have an echo. Thank you all so much. This event was incredible. It'll be available to watch the recording immediately after the event ends, and then it'll be up on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much to Jewelle Gomez and Krystal Smith, and a special shout out again to Stephanie, Andrea. You're incredible. You all have a great night.